Our next speaker comes to us from Washington, and we're delighted to welcome Mindel De La Torre, who is the Chief of the International Bureau of the Federal Communications Commission. Mindel, welcome.
Good morning, and thank you, Chris, for that introduction. I'd like to extend my congratulations as well to Hungary on the presidency of the EU. That's quite a feat. And I'd like to thank also the National Media and Communications Authority of Hungary for organizing this event. And everybody is very interested in All for Broadband and Broadband for All. It's a great topic. And I happened to be in Budapest on my father's birthday. This would have been my father's birthday, and his mother was Hungarian, and in typical American style, the Hungarian married a Cuban, so now you have a Cuban, Hungarian, American talking to you about the U.S. National Broadband Plan. And so obviously that is something that I'm here to talk about. And according to the ITU, it turns out that there are about 82 countries that have national broadband plans, and I think Hungary will be on Friday the 83rd country to add to that list. And these developments are significant because when you have a country that has a broadband plan, it basically creates the framework for the government to then act. And I think sometimes we have very stringent goals that we're trying to achieve, but it's not just those goals that are important, but the fact that the government makes it a priority is very important. And this has been the case in the United States as well with our national broadband plan. We've got, it's really focused our efforts. I think that, we've been able to, particularly at the Federal Communications Commission where I work, a lot of our work is now focused on that. And so this morning I'm going to provide you basically an overview of the National Broadband Plan and also the implementation of that plan, because we actually have begun to implement it since it was about a year ago that we did this. Okay. So obviously one of the issues that we faced in the United States was sort of looking at the challenge of how to deploy and encourage adoption of broadband. And this is particularly true, as we've heard already today, in rural, unserved, and underserved communities and particular segments of society. Now, some countries have greater challenges than others, and in the United States we have a very large physical space, geography, as well as areas where we have large population bases. So in October and November of 2009, so about a year and a half ago, the FCC conducted a national telephone survey of about 5,000 adults, and we found that about 65% of Americans use broadband at home. Now, the other 35%, approximately 80 million adults in America, do not. Now, you'll see from the chart that there are some reasons for this. I mean, 35% of the adults who don't use broadband, who I'll call the non-adopters, basically are older, they have lower incomes, they are from some of they're less educated, many of them are from racial or ethnic minorities, as well as having disabilities. So this is a whole community that we're missing. And so you'll see that 36% of the adopters say that the reason that they don't adopt is high cost. 15% of that cite that there's a very high monthly cost. 9% cite that their activation fees and contracts are the reason. And then 10% cite the cost as a concern, are saying that they don't have a computer to access it. So that's one of the reasons. And then the other is the lack of digital literacy. And we've heard that already mentioned today. When we have 22% of Americans that say that they are not, of the non-adopters, are saying that they don't adopt because they actually don't feel comfortable with the internet, they're afraid of some of the things that it can do, and they don't feel comfortable actually on a computer. Then we also have 10% who say, well, it's not really relevant to me, I'm not really, it's not really something I care about. And then we also have, and that's about actually 19%. And then we also have other reasons as well that people aren't really adopting. Now, one of the costs that you see is the cost of digital exclusion. And that digital exclusion is large and growing. And I think the more a country becomes digitally adept, the more that divide is pronounced. And so you see that in terms of lost opportunities and other things. So you'll see that as more of life moves online, that divide is larger. And it's particularly important for some of those marginalized groups that I mentioned. My son last year was applying for a job at a grocery store. This was not as to be the manager of the grocery store. This was to be a bag boy or a very minimum wage job. And the only way that he could apply was online. So you can imagine that the people who would normally be applying for those jobs may not have broadband at home, and they need to go to a library or other sources like that in order to do that. And he's now applying for a university, and most of the universities in the United States want their applicants to do it as well online. So that also creates another part of that digital divide that I was talking about. It also creates inefficiencies for government, and sometimes we found in our broadband plan that the government actually charges money for online applications, and so we have in the United States our Internal Revenue Service collects taxes, and they were at one point charging money in order for you to file your taxes online, even though it saved them a lot of money for you to do that. So I think that's one of the reasons actually that we published our broadband plan. And here is our broadband plan. Because people said, well, why did you publish it if you're talking about broadband? And we said, well, because there are many people who can't get access to it. And so and we've now published the broadband plan in many languages, as well as a Braille version for people who are blind. So in the United States, basically, the U.S. Congress was the one that took the action to commit to the concept of a broadband plan. And this happened in 2009. Now, if you remember what was going on in the United States in 2009 at the time, we were having some economic difficulties. And so the plan was actually encompassed within what we call the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And in there, one of the big areas was job growth and fundamental economic growth for long-term sustainability in the United States. And so basically the Recovery Act provided for stimulus for grants, for data collection and policy developments, as well as focusing on broadband development and take-up throughout the country. And the Recovery Act provided $7 billion to expand access around the United States, and it provided it to two agencies within the U.S. government. One is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration at the Department of Commerce, which has a grant program that for $4.4 billion, and that program mainly gave its grants for middle mile kinds of projects. And then they were also tasked with coming up with a public map of broadband, which had never been done before in the United States. And so, and just a few weeks ago, NTIA, in conjunction with the FCC, came up with the first ever public searchable nationwide broadband map. And I'll show you that at the end of the presentation. And obviously these tools are very important for consumers to be able to find where they have broadband in the country. And then the RUS, which is the Department of Agriculture program, actually had $2.5 billion worth of grants. Now they did theirs in terms of grants and loans as well, and loan guarantees. And most of theirs went to telemedicine, it went to distance learning, as well as some of the broadband programs in rural areas around the United States. And then, most importantly, from the perspective of the FCC, the Recovery Act actually mandated that the FCC come up with a broadband plan within 1 year. And you may ask why a broadband plan. Well, you've already heard from the speakers today, so I don't really need to go into that. But broadband is clearly the infrastructure challenge of the 21st century. So on this slide, you'll see that railways, electricity, and highway systems were all challenges we faced during the last 2 centuries. Now it's broadband, and I think that, the Congress realized that this was a very important issue for the United States, and so they were the ones that basically mandated it. A lot of people have a hard time believing that the United States, it took them that long to come up with a broadband plan. But broadband basically is an indispensable platform, and so you'll see it, as it's been mentioned already today, for innovation and job creation, and so you'll see that different organizations, I think the World Bank and different organizations have come up with saying that the higher penetration of broadband drives GDP and job growth. It enables small businesses. In the United States, we have what I think most of you are familiar with eBay. eBay basically for the last 15 years has been helping small entrepreneurs, sometimes just individuals, and it's basically offered a platform for hundreds of thousands of transactions and U.S. entrepreneurs, basically facilitating $60 billion worth of business just through that one platform. And it also basically has their national challenges, where there you can have, in public education, you can have digital textbooks and distance learning. Also, healthcare, very important to lower the costs of healthcare and to make it more accessible for remote diagnosis and electronic health records. It can also play, obviously, a major role in the clean energy aspects of it. I think that we're all looking at that as we move to cleaner energy. And then, as we've all seen lately in the Middle East and the North African region, it can be a platform for speech and civic participation. Now, that may not make some governments as happy as others, but it is a reality that's part of the deployment of broadband.